And so people that are still thinking in the old mindset of, I just need an air mattress and a hot plate and I can throw it up on Airbnb and I'll be fine, it just doesn't work anymore. It's not profitable.
Welcome back, folks. Appreciate you joining us for another episode of VRNation. I have a friend of mine with me, Mark Lumpkin, joining me. It's a pretty great episode. I hope everybody tunes in. He is joining us from STR Cribs. And I think that it's a very timely discussion, as some of our last episodes really went through talking about how you could differentiate. And especially in times like this year, 2024 is a tough year for a lot of people. How do we try to stand out in a crowd? How do we try to avoid? How do we improve our direct bookings? How do we do all these things? And it really comes down to the nuts and bolts. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. And I'd love to turn it over and introduce my friend, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to chat with you guys today. I would say that the overall theme of the short-term rental industry is just that it's changing. And what used to work, even in 2020, where you could simply buy any house, slap some IKEA furniture in it, throw it up on Airbnb or VRBO and make a profit, that doesn't work anymore. The game has changed. And the competition has stepped up, especially in certain markets. The level and the quality of the product that is being put out there for travelers is crazy. There's some incredible homes now. And so people that are still thinking in the old mindset of, I just need an air mattress and a hot plate and I can throw it up on Airbnb and I'll be fine, it just doesn't work anymore. It's not profitable. And so we've kind of been at the forefront of that, leading that charge. And we've been around for about 5 years at STR Cribs. We are a licensed general contractor, which makes us a little bit different than a lot of the other design firms that you see out there. We can actually do meaningful change to your property. And we can help you improve the real estate value, improve the revenue by maybe adding bedroom, bathroom count, increasing occupancy. And then we also really are well known for amenities. And so if you see my screen, if you're watching this on, if you're watching the video here, not just listening to the audio, you'll see a property behind me that's a good example of what the market has today with pickleball courts and fire pits and mini golf courses and swimming pools and all kinds of fun, exciting stuff that guests are looking for. And what we've really found is that people who think about the property as part of the vacation, you're not just going to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. You're going to Gatlinburg, Tennessee to stay at this cabin with this awesome view and this barrel sauna and this hot tub and this and that for the kids. That's really what people are looking for when they book short-term rentals now. And so the game has changed, and we're just trying to help people stay ahead of the curve and continue to be profitable in investing in short-term rentals.
Right. So Mark, in our discussion before, you said you've been in the industry for about 6 years. How did you find yourself in this role? Like, how did you find yourself with this company? Where did you start from? Tell us a little bit about your beginnings.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's kind of an interesting story. Probably like anybody, we all kind of just fell into this industry, and I was no different. So in my late 20s, me and my wife we had just met when I was like 26 or 27, and we had decided we were going to go travel the world. It was a really, really fun experience. We sold all of our stuff. I sold a house. She sold a house. We condensed everything into a tiny little 10 by 15 storage unit. That's all we kept. We sold all of our vehicles, and we left in a backpack, and we took off, and we spent about a year on the road. But what had happened is we originally thought that we would go stay at like hostels and couch surf and really do the very traditional backpacking through Europe experience. And what we found out within about a week was that we weren't 19 or 20. We were like 27, 28. So we weren't in our early 20s. We were in our late 20s. And that type of travel quickly realized it was not for us. And we also weren't broke either. So we didn't have to couch surf and we didn't have to stay at hostels for $15 a night in a room of bunk beds with 30 other people. So we started looking for alternatives. We went the bed and breakfast route. We tried hotels, and we kind of quickly fell in love with actually Airbnb and realized we could go get our own apartment with a bathroom, a kitchen, a washer dryer, and that became our mode of transportation. So That was a week or two into our travel experience. Then we traveled for a year with short-term rentals, and we kind of fell in love with the industry as a whole. And then we had kids and we had dogs when we came back, and we really became avid short-term rental travelers. That's just our mode of transportation.
Right.
And so that was how we started in the industry, was actually as guests. And then we ended up investing in our own properties. And I ended up falling into this role with one of my friends just by happenstance. And so that's really kind of our story. I think the cool thing is we were able to see firsthand what we liked and what we didn't like as guests, as
Right.
people staying, and what worked and didn't work. So we tried to implement those learnings as being on the other side of the coin into what we do today, which would be helping property owners set up their properties, because we've been guests for so many years.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And it's interesting because when I think through how people get into property management, for example, and a lot of times like the stories are truly interesting. I've had just the VRNation board itself, right? Just talking with several friends on the board and how they got into it, fell into it is probably the best way that everybody talks about property management. Even Cabino, the property management company that I work with, they fell into it through happenstance. It just happened to be helping people, right? So it's truly funny in that way. But let's go a little bit further with STR Crips, because I think we talk about property management, we talk about what the value proposition of STR Cribs brings. What's truly the difference, right? So a lot of people don't understand how the two fit. So maybe talk a little bit about how STR Cribs fits in with property management and how you realize that value proposition.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. If you're a property manager, do you want to manage 5 properties that average $50,000 a year in revenue? Or do you want to manage one property that averages $250,000 a year in revenue? It's a pretty simple equation. Properties that produce more revenue and are more desirable for guests are easier to manage. They have higher guest satisfaction. You only have to deal with one owner who's happy because they're making money and they're not barely breaking even or losing money every month. It's just a win-win-win all across the board. And so what we found is that really the property managers who are having the most success and are actually like not pulling their hair out are the ones who are really focused and selective with the inventory and the property owners that they deal with. And I've got one partner that they manage about 1,500 properties, and every year they fire the bottom 10%, and they say it's time for you guys to go. You won't reinvest into the home. You're not competing with the current market conditions. You had 10 houses you had to compete with last year. This year you have 20 houses you have to compete with, and everyone has hot tubs and you won't put a hot tub in. And so it's time for you to go find somebody else because we're not enjoying managing your property. So really, really being selective is important. And I think that's hard for a lot of property managers to wrap their head
Absolutely,
around.
especially now. Yeah,
For sure.
now, I mean, it's like revenue's not exactly bursting at the seams, especially after, a year like 2025 and 2024 months back to back, especially depending on where you're at, I should say, depending on where you're at. Like we're up in the Northern Rockies, we are so dependent upon weather forecasts, we're dependent upon Yellowstone. We're dependent upon so many different factors that bring people in. I think that's kind of where we get tripped up. But ultimately, when I think about companies like STR Cribs, like I don't know of any in Northern Rockies. I mean, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's design architect firms, so on and so forth. But nobody that really focuses specifically on short-term rentals. So how do you position yourself differently from other companies? Like, how do you position yourselves differently than Smith Architects down the road?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think our positioning is really just based upon our experience, which is that we only focus on short-term rentals, and we've been doing that. And so we're able to take 5 years and hundreds of setups and look backwards on what we did and glean from that experience and say, hey, the things that we've learned that work in the short-term rental space are very, very, very different from traditional real estate. And that's another thing that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around, right? Which is that if you showed 1,000 people a property and said, hey, what would you do to this house? The first answer that all of them would say is, oh, we'd improve the kitchen and the bathrooms, right? That's the most traditional answer of how you add value to real estate. Short-term rentals in most markets, I mean, with the very few exception of a very high-end luxury market, those kitchens and bathrooms don't even drive revenue. They make no meaningful difference in revenue. And so when I look at a market let's just pick like a Texas market, a major metropolitan market in Texas, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, one of those markets. And I look at properties that have 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, and one has a luxury kitchen and the rest don't. The luxury kitchen house doesn't make any difference in revenue. It makes the same amount of money as the rest of the house. But if I grab houses that are the same bedroom bathroom count and one has a pickleball court and one has a game room and the other ones don't have that, the pickleball court and the game room is going to make 20, 30, $40,000 more a year in revenue. And so then the question becomes, a traditional real estate investor would say, yeah, I want to spend $30,000 on a kitchen remodel because that's my highest ROI. That's what's been ingrained in me since I was a baby.
Right.
And we would say, no, 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 that kitchen's fine. Throw some new hinges on the doors, paint the cabinets for a couple of grand, and spend the other 25 grand putting a pickleball court in that backyard because that's actually going to drive more revenue. And so the game's changing, and the short-term rental, just to kind of wrap up and answer your question, the biggest difference between us and them is we know what works for short-term rentals specifically, and they know what works for traditional real estate, and they're the complete opposites. And that's very
brother,
hard.
if I had you in the bar with a room full of property managers, I'd probably sit and just watch the show, because everybody, the one thing I always find funny, and everybody listening, I love you. Like and share, subscribe if you really want to go toe to toe. If you disagree with me, but property managers, are a lot of alphas, right? A lot of alpha personalities. These guys they're entrepreneurs. They know what they're doing, and depending on where they're at, right? So I have friends in California. It's either Lake Tahoe, right? It's very very competitive area. Idaho, very sparse. And we have competitors, but some of them are great. I mean, in disrespect, some of them are banging rocks together. But when it comes to, areas like Gatlinburg and, everybody's got their idea of what. And so like the first question comes up, because I've heard this, right? So, Adam and I talk about it quite a bit, where we're just like, hey, we ought to try and get pickleball courts, or, we've gotten into the discussion around barrel saunas, and we've gotten into the discussion on what things people can do to really differentiate their properties. And the funniest part is it's just like, we don't have the construction resources to do that area, right? So we try to come up with different ideas and thoughts, and and try to play off emotional heartstrings of guests, right? So you put things that they visually can pick up on, right? Like I always tell people, like, they're corny and all that, but if you can get one of those chainsaw carved bears or eagles in the back, and then you put games and such around it, it's a cheap way to really improve a backyard. But what you're really doing is you're imprinting on the little one's mind, so that when grandma and grandpa say, where you guys want to go on vacation? Well, I want to go to the place there, and then boom, you've got a return guest. But it's like, that mindset to me feels different than what you're talking about. And
Yeah,
how
it's
do you
definitely.
bridge the gap with that,
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I'm not saying that ours is the only way. I agree that usually local property managers know what works and doesn't work in their market. But I don't think anyone listening to this, or any property manager, would disagree with me and market specific amenities and say, if you're in Gatlinburg, no one could argue that a hot tub and a barrel sauna is going to drive more revenue. No one's going to argue that an indoor pool is going to drive more revenue. A lot of houses in Gatlinburg have that. And so
Yep.
when you dive deep into the market, there are little niches that work and are more profitable. If you're in Tampa, Florida, a hot tub's not going to drive as much revenue as pickleball court or a game room or things like that. So there's very market specific
Right.
amenities. But nobody could argue that a house that's highly amenitized is clearly going to make more money than a house that doesn't have those things. So that's key one. Key two is oftentimes, how do you do it? Because that's tough. When you're in certain markets, there's not a lot of local resources. And then key three is, how do you get your owners to pay for it? Which is, right, how do you get them to reinvest in the property? And really, that's the mindset shift, where the most profitable investors in today's game are new investors, because they don't have this perception of what the industry was 5 years ago and thinking that that's still going to work for them. And so folks that have owned the same property for 8 years, I talk to them every day, and they call me and they say, last year, 3 years ago, we did 100 grand. 2 years ago, we did 90. Last year, we did 80. This year, we're pacing 72,000. And the question is just, guys, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And
Right.
you are on a steady decline in revenue year over year over year. And the reason for that is you're not reinvesting into your property. You're not adding anything new. You've changed nothing, but the market has changed. And so those are hard conversations to have with property owners. And sometimes leads into them saying, nope, I don't want to do anything different. I'll do 60 grand next year. But those property owners that do buy in and say, yeah, I get it. I got you. You got to have a game plan for that. Okay,
Right.
cool. We looked at the market data. We got this partner. STR Cribs offers financing. You don't even have to come out of pocket for this. They'll finance the renovations for you. They'll get you a couple amenities. They'll turn that unused formal dining room into a fourth bedroom so we can increase occupancy by 4 people and get you to 12 versus 8. And like, there's real meaningful changes that we've got a game plan on your property to do. And we project next year, instead of doing 60, we think you're going to get back to 85 or 90. And so you've got to get buy-in from your owners. You got to have a
Sure.
game plan for them. You got to have a partner. And if anything, like some of our best property managers incentivize their owners. Hey guys, we're tired of managing your crummy property, but you know what? If you reinvest some money into it and you can get this thing to do more revenue, we'll drop our fee from 20% to 18% or 15%. We want to participate in the success of your property. We've got the game plan, we've got the partner, they offer the money, and we'll discount our fee to help you guys get this thing back into a top performer. That's a winning scenario for any property manager. And if
Right.
the client says no to that, do you even want them as your client anymore anyways?
Right. No, and that makes sense. And it's definitely an interesting discussion point because like one of the questions I had, right? Because when I think of where we're located in Idaho, right? It's a very sparse area. Like there's not a lot of population in eastern Idaho. How do you like what do you where do you even start? Like where do you start? If I'm saying, hey, we're in Island Park, here's what our typical amenities are. And we were talking about this a little before we started recording, and it was, we have hot tubs, we have, saunas. There's a few properties in the area that maybe have a pickleball court. The question is, what type of add-ons do you put in that environment, knowing that we also get 600 inches of snow a
Yeah.
year, and we get sub-zero temperatures come January, February, and it's like trying to balance that out. Like, I mean, if I'm in Arizona, it's kind of a no-brainer. I can put a putting green in my backyard. But if I'm in Idaho, do I do that? Like, how do you define what works in each market? What's the best way to go about that?
Yeah. That's a great question. And we could probably talk on that for hours. I would try to give a kind of an answer that doesn't take hours, but you just got to know the market, your local market. And the best way to do that is to talk to a local property manager, have properties there, but then look at the comp set. Who's got the best properties in this market? And then what do they have? They're my North Star. I'm going to go find the top 5 most profitable properties and say, okay, all 5 of these have this, this, and this. So clearly, if I want to compete with them, I have to have this, this, and this. And then if I want to stand out, what can I do differently? So I definitely like to look at the top performing homes, use them as my North Star. You've got to look at your piece of property specifically, right? What does the house have? Every piece of real estate is so unique. Do I have a great view that other people don't have? And I can take advantage of that. I can I can build a deck here, put my amenities there, take my photo of people enjoying the amenities and the view. Those are kind of the recipes for success. So it really comes down to what are the best properties in your market doing? And then what do you have that's unique and different that you can capitalize on?
Right.
Do I have unused space I'm not utilizing? Do I have a view that I'm not maximizing? Do I have a deck that's underutilized? And some things like that. And then the last piece of it is there a niche that I'm missing out on? Do I have a house in Nashville, Tennessee? If I bought a house in Nashville, Tennessee, it would be pink Barbie themed. Not for me, not for my family, but because Nashville, Tennessee is the bachelorette capital of the world. And that's what I'm going to do
Right.
because I can go very niche on that and capitalize on that subsect of people. So those are really your three ideas for how you can be successful in any market.
Wow. No, that is great. That is actually great because I struggle with it. I'm not gonna lie. Like there's a balance between operational. I mean, again, when I think operations and I see some of the stuff, like even in your background, right? Like, and I'm going, oh man, my maintenance guy would probably have a little bit of a conversation with me on how am I supposed to maintain this stuff, right? So it looks like it's a true balance, but it is something that is a topic of conversation because I see properties And the homeowners come back and they say, Jamie, I don't understand. Like why, last year I had a banner year. Why are we struggling this year? What's going on? And of course, it
Yeah.
all starts to point back at marketing. And you're like, well, are we marketing it the right way? Are we pushing it hard enough? Sometimes I just honestly, I don't know. I have
Yeah.
no idea why last year it was hot and this year it's not, whether it's the return guests were up, like, and you sit there and you jump into data, try and dig it all up. But, it really boils down to how do you keep up with it, right? So, I think through trends, I know, is it something where, pickleball, right? This was the trend that wasn't supposed to catch on. And then all of a sudden it's still building synergy, right? Apparently I'm the only person on the planet that doesn't play pickleball yet. And I'm pretty sure I have some paddles sitting around here
I
somewhere.
don't play pickleball either, just so you know.
All right. Well,
We put in a lot of
next conference, we're doing it. We're gonna pickleball out. Just gotta wear my
yeah.
knee braces, right? So I don't roll my knees.
Yeah,
But
but man,
it's
what I'd say to that is too is what you're touching on is a lot of personal bias, which is really hard for people to overcome, and myself included. Like I've got a good example. I've got a property. Me and my wife have a property. We manage ours. It's not far from us. It's near the beach, and we had some guests ask like they inquired on renting. They didn't book it yet, and they said, "Hey, is there a TV in every bedroom?" And I was like, they're asking about 4th of July weekend. It's Florida. It's going to be 90 degrees, beautiful, sunny, summertime. Blue Angels are in town. Like, what are you talking about? You want TVs in every bedroom? We got a TV in the primary, TV in the game room, and TV
right.
in the living room. And I was like, that's dumb. And then my wife looked at me and she said, it doesn't matter what you think is dumb. Yeah, our family would be out enjoying the sunshine and the beach, but this person is asking for TVs in every bedroom, and flat screen TVs only cost $200 at Walmart. So quit being cheap and go buy TVs for every bedroom because that's what the guests want. So that's a really, really, really hard thing for investors to overcome is their personal bias and their mindset.
Right.
And a lot of owners still think of this as what would we want on vacation? Would I want a bright pink Barbie themed house? Hell no. But would a bright pink Barbie themed house in Nashville, Tennessee crush it and be a great investment for me? Absolutely. So you just have to get out of that mindset of what do I want and what works versus me is not necessarily what works for my investment property and for my market.
So awesome. I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me, right? And I've bandied the idea around because we have a diverse group of owners. We have real estate investors. So I'll get people that I'm just looking for a property. Like I don't really have any intention of being there. That's the Barbie themed concept from my perspective. A lot of our owners though are like this is their vacation home, right? They're renting out their vacation home. They're trying to make ends meet. So a lot of them, their personal bias does come into play mainly because they are spending a lot of time there personally, and that is their home. Or it's, the other
For
ones
sure.
are, this was my grandma's cabin and she passed, we're keeping it in the family. I don't want anything to change, leave her urn on the fireplace. It's like, no, dude,
Right. And then
no.
it's just going to be hard for them to compete because of those personal bias. And that's fine. If
Right,
you don't want to make top dollar, that's okay. We're not, and that's the other thing I'd say. We're not the company for you guys. If you're not in this as an investment, if you're in this as a second grandma's vacation property, we just rent out on the weekends to try to barely cover the mortgage, that's fine. You're not the customer for us.
right.
And if I was a property manager, I'd say the same thing. You're not the customer for me. I want to be in the profitability game and I want to have the best properties in my portfolio.
Right, and that makes a ton of sense. And again, it's like I think that seems to be the key with property managers is just simply, the why. The why is very different, and so it's like
Yes.
understanding the why and then what the next steps are. Because as we go through, and I'm trying to like put the X's and O's in my mind of, well, how do I move ahead with having these conversations with homeowners, and it's a delicate balance, right? Because they're upset they're not making as much money and I'm upset because they're not making as much money, but there's really
Yep.
nothing I can do to make it, to change that. And as we go through and say, hey, here's 4 suggestions for you to make improvements to your property. Now they're at a point where they're like, well, I'm losing my revenue coming in. I have to invest more into this. It's a sticky balance because a lot of times they're going to, they'll start to waver and potentially pull out. It's hard because we don't have there's just not a lot of properties in our area. I mean, there are I'll just say there are a good number, but when it comes to supply versus demand, it's not destined, right? Like it's not
Like I need to buy a couple properties in your market. So we need to talk offline. Sounds like I need to come invest in a couple properties in your market, optimize them, crush it, set it up. And a lot of times having those portfolio pieces, those really like shining stars in your portfolio, that's the best way to get property owners over their personal bias. And so to say,
right,
hey guys, that's great. I know you don't want to make these changes and you're worried about the money being invested in it, but you made $1,000 last year. The Johnsons have a similar property 2 miles away from you with the same square footage. They paid the same amount of money for, same cost basis. They made $150,000. So they made twice as much money as you. Are you sure you don't want to reinvest in the property? Because you can keep making 75 grand, but they're going to keep making a buck 50 because they did it right. And a lot
right,
of times, you know, money talks. And if you
right.
have real tangible proof that this concept will work, people will put their personal bias aside.
Right. No, and that's a great call out. And again, I think it's one of those where if, as a property manager, if you put your skin in the game and say, hey, I'll knock off, a couple
Yep.
percent off your commission just to help you get this kick started so that, ultimately we'll both make more money. That makes a ton of sense. And it's just something we had to dig deeper on for sure.
For sure,
One
man.
of the things
And
that
the cool thing too is when you have better properties, you have better guests. It's just like, you know, the folks that are booking that bottom of the barrel property that had to lower its price, lower its price, lower its price last minute because it had no bookings are usually the worst guests. And I know it from
right,
personal experience. We just had one of our properties do the same thing. It was a slow weekend and we dropped the price to like $150 a night, which we probably shouldn't have done. And we took a $450 weekend booking and the people did like $2,000 worth of damage. And
yeah,
so I was like, it wasn't even worth it. And it's just a headache. And we got to deal with air cover and what bad reviews. And that's not the business I want to be in. And I don't think that's the
right.
business any property manager wants to be in. I think they want happy owners, happy guests, great properties, high nightly rates, happy cleaners. Like it leads to a win-win-win for everyone when you got better properties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because we're running into situations where we have a couple of our properties that we've been getting hit with the fraudsters, right? So they'll come in
Yeah.
and they'll rent for a week, stay 2 nights, and then say, oh, well, there's dead flies on the windowsill. So therefore, I want a full refund. We can't stay here. We're leaving. And we packed up and left. And, now all of a sudden it's like I have to battle with Airbnb. You know what I mean? So it's a rough go because and it all builds on itself, just like you're saying. Like, if properties are like our top tier properties, never have a problem.
Never have a
Never have a
problem.
problem with any of them. Yeah, we don't.
You you have the happiest guests who clean all the bed sheets on their way out, even though you didn't ask them to. Start a load of towels, leave a couple hours early, give you a 5-star review. They're coming back in 6 months when they're back in town. Da, 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 da.
right.
It's the 80-20 rule. The 80% of your customers are always the happiest and the best, and the 20% are always the bottom of the barrel and give you 80% of your headaches.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So you talked about performance, right? And looking at properties that are in your area. What would be so again, you have to remember, and I'm going to take just a little minute segue to again say thanks everybody for joining us. Would really appreciate like, subscribe, throw some comments our way. Be patient. We'll get back to you one way or the other. And if you want to join the podcast, please feel free to join the podcast and let us know, and we'll get you scheduled. And so as we go forward, are going back to the conversation. You talked about performance, right? What's the best way in a certain market to say, let me take a look at this property as an example? How would you go about doing that? Because how I would go about doing it, I don't know if it's the right way. So how do you do that?
Yeah, great question. So we kind of touched on this just a little bit ago, but I would go back to just the 3 pillars, which is what's the market? How do we dive into the market by looking at the top performing properties? Who's doing the best in this market? If I'm a professional athlete and I want to I want to play basketball and I got to look at who's the best basketball players and then what are they doing? What's their training regimen? What do they eat? When do they exercise? When do they sleep? How many games do they play? It's the same thing. I want to look at the top performing people in my market and figure out what are they doing? Are they dog friendly? Do they have a 2-night minimum or a 3-night minimum? Do they sleep this many guests or that many guests? Do they have these amenities or not these amenities? Do they allow instant booking or do they require a request to book? Like I'm going to go through all the things, not just what does their house have? Do they have a 65-inch TV and I only have a 55-inch TV? That's not the equation. There's a lot of pieces to the equation, to this
Sure.
puzzle. So I'm going to look at those guys and figure out what are they doing, and then that's my benchmark. If I want to be a top performer, I take my 5 top properties in the market and I set that and say, I at least have to do what these guys are doing at every level or better if I want to perform better. So that's really how I build the foundation of what we need to do. And then I look at my property as what's possible. Okay, well, I'm not beachfront. I'm across the street from the beach, and the best property in the market is on the beach. Okay, I can't pick my house up and move it to the beach.
Right.
I gotta do with what I can do. So I've got to be realistic with what my property offers. And then I want to figure out what's unique about my property. And I go back to, this is really an acquisitions question. If you're buying a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in that's 1,500 square feet, in a Hayden home community where there's another 1,000 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes that are 1,500 square feet within a stone's throw, there's nothing unique about that piece of real estate. And you can't differentiate it in the short term rental industry. So don't buy that property. That's not ever going to be a profitable short term rental. But my cabin in the woods, that's a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath that has this really unique view of the Smoky Mountains and is only 1 mile away from the popular hiking trail, and I have a little biking trail, boom, I got something different and unique about this property, and I got to capitalize on that.
Right.
Maybe that means that I'm going to go after that guest that's coming into town for health and wellness and hiking and adventuring, and I'm going to have a cold plunge, a sauna, a little yoga area on my deck. I'm going to provide a crazy good coffee bar, and I'm going to advertise this as the cabin getaway for adventurous couples. And so that's what you've got to do. You've got to figure out what the best properties are, figure out what the market needs, and then figure out what's unique about your property and double down on it. Go all
Right.
in on whatever it is. If I got crazy cool views of the lake, that has to be the draw. That's the reason people come to my house, and I'm providing paddle boards and I'm providing kayaks and I'm providing fishing gear, and I'm creating that, making that lake the experience and the reason you're coming to my house.
No, that makes great sense. Like I have a property that it's an awesome property, absolutely awesome property. It's on the lake, but there's no pier. There's no means of getting out onto the water. And we're having conversations with our homeowner. It was just he's a great guy, just an absolute great guy. And the discussion on liability versus adding amenities comes in. So at what point do you draw a line between liability and having another amenity?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a hard thing to balance. You know, we talk about it all the time with like fire pits and how can you limit your liability on fire pits? Well, you can meet all the safety criteria. You can make sure that you have a 15-foot gravel pit. You can make sure that you've got no trees directly above you. You can make sure you have a fire extinguisher on hand. You can make sure that you've got signage that directs people on how to use it. You can do a propane pit versus a wood burning fire pit. So you can still have a great fire pit and limit your risk and your exposure by checking all the boxes when it comes to safety and doing it in the most optimal way for that. And I think that goes through with everything you do, right? There's always
Sure.
going to be risk. If you got a pool, a kid could drown in the pool. But what you need to do is you need to have the pool fully fenced, and you need to have signage, and you need to provide life jackets, or maybe not life jackets. But you want to go through and make sure that you're doing as much as you can to limit the risk. And at a certain point, if all we cared about was risk, then nothing would ever happen in this world. I mean, cars are dangerous, but people are still building cars and people are still
Right.
selling.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, I look at it that way too, but I also balance like what's the reality with insurance, right? So will you be able to get insurance? Will the insurance drop you if they find out that you have a peer, right? Those are the kind of things that we try to balance. I'm really good friends with our insurance agent, and as always, whenever you talk to insurance people, it's well, the blackest of black hats, right?
Sure.
A star could fall out of the sky. But what are you gonna do
For
then?
sure,
It's
man. They
like,
sure could.
yeah,
Like
yeah, right,
we do like custom bunk beds for kids, and we build them to withstand 300 pounds. And we put a sign on that say that only people 150 pounds can get in. And we do spiral slides that are enclosed so people can't fall off the slide. And we really think about that stuff strategically. But at the end of the day, if you're not, if you've got to play it safe, then you're going to have a hard time competing because one of your other people in your market is going to go build that pier, and they're going
yeah.
to have the pier, and people are going to book their property because they have the pier.
Yeah, like one of the big things I'm curious about your thoughts on this, rock walls, climbing walls, right? I have so many people, we're out in the mountains. We have a lot of we have great climbing areas around Eastern Idaho. How do you make a rock wall safe? I mean, are we talking putting a mat on the bottom? Like what would you do in that scenario?
Dude, we've never done one. We've done
Really?
kid rock climbing walls that
Oh
go
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like,
That's what I mean. Like I'm talking inside of a house. So you're talking
okay,
maybe
yeah,
10
yeah.
feet
Okay, yeah.
max.
I thought you meant like a legit rock climbing
No,
wall. The
no, no,
kids,
no, no, no. Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
man, we do them, and they have huge foam pits in the bottom of them. They have a 2 foot foam pit. They're massive. They cover a couple feet each way, and you can drop one in the list description if you want to. We just do huge foam pits at the bottom.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Cause there's always an industry. So I have some awesome people, right? And they're very active people. And they're like, I got a great idea. I've got this garage that's got extra space, right? And I'm looking at it's like a, cured cement floor. And I'm like, "Oh, look, we'll put some foam mats down." And I'm like, it's like the little 1/4 inch foam mats. I'm like, I don't think
Yeah,
so.
that
That's
ain't gonna
probably
fly.
not going to be a good idea. But the concept is there. Like they want to do it. And it's like, well, if there's some level of guidance, right? So, hey, if you're going to put it at 10 feet, like if your ceiling's maxed at 10 feet, you got to at least have 1 foot deep foam mat to catch, right? Like some
Yep.
level of guidance and understanding of that probably would be helpful, but I don't know anybody that would, put that in writing, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. But if people need some advice, man, they can reach out to me and I'll give advice. And we've done those before. And we do, like you said, pretty deep foam pits. We were at one the other day and I was able to get into the foam pit and crawl under the foam. I'm a big guy and I was completely covered by all the foam balls. And I jumped out and they went everywhere. And so, yeah, there's definitely ways to do it safely. But yeah, a little 1/4 inch foam mat, that ain't going to do it. Got it.
Gotcha, gotcha. So that's cool though, because again, that's where all of a sudden, parents want to bring their families, right? We get a good number of our guests come from the Salt Lake metropolitan area, right? So larger, outdoorsy, healthy population of people, and when they come up, it's family related, it's faith related, it's outdoors focused, a lot of ATV, UTV, trail riding, snowmobile riding, mountain hiking. We get a good fair share of hunters, which kind of pivots into my next question. When you think of the people that you have coming in and they're outdoorsy people or they're very active people, what we struggle with a little bit is our seasonality, right? So I think a lot of markets around the country, seasonality really teeters around school, when school start, when school end, right? So a lot of peak vacation times are going to be when the kids are out of school. When you get up to Eastern Idaho, the weather also has a lot to do with this, right? So we call it, we have summer and we have winter and then we have mud season. And essentially, when the snow's melting, there's no paved roads. I mean, there are very few paved roads in our area. When it comes to the fall and all of a sudden the rains hit, or we get snowstorms that dump, 3 feet of snow and then all of a sudden it all melts, that's a difficult time. So how do you get amenities to try to draw people in those shoulder seasons that also pay off year round? Like how do you make that call? How do you make that decision?
Yeah, I think I'm less interested and focused on the shoulder seasons and the really tough seasons and trying to eke out a couple of bookings here and there with bad weather and people in school and things like that. And I'm more interested in optimizing for the busy season. And that's where the money's made. Can I go get $1,500 a night versus 1,000 a night because I've got a really cool property? And in that 3 or 4 months where it's just slammed and banging, I'm 100% occupancy and I'm making 50% more revenue in that. That's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on optimizing for the busy season, not necessarily trying to make a little more money in the off season and doing things like that. So if my pickleball court makes me an extra 10,000 in my 3 or 4 months in the busy season, I don't care if it makes me nothing in the slow season. It's paid for itself by getting me that extra revenue in the busy season.
Got it. Got it. So that makes a lot of sense because ultimately, when I think through just how and we talked about that a lot, right? Because I think people they look at what they're making during those peak months, and if there's a wavering amount in the peak months, I think a lot of property managers, I know I do as well, make the mistake of going, oh, well, we're going to try and get some more occupancy in the shoulder seasons. We're going to try and push this up higher when the numbers truly don't speak to it. right? Like you can look at it and go, well, I know what the demand is coming. I can see it in my key data. That is not going to show in reality, like there's any spike in demand. So maybe you can be on top, but you're still going to be getting, 50 to 60% of what you would at peak season, even if you do get those bookings. So
For sure.
it's a good call out because ultimately I think, really hitting that window, makes a big difference for sure. For sure.
Definitely,
Absolutely.
definitely. Yeah. Yeah, you're not it's kind of the same philosophy in business where people are always like, "How do we get our lowest performers to do better?" And it's
Right.
kinda like, "No, how do we get our best?" 'Cause we settle. We think, "Oh, it's busy season. Man, we did really well. We were booked all summer and we made, our average nightly rate was the industry standard." We're happy with that. We don't usually realize that optimizing for the best times is the most profitable way usually to run a business,
Right.
not trying to do a little better in the worst of times.
No, and that's a great call out. I mean, that's an absolutely great call out. All right. So we're running a little bit shy of time. So I want to be honest because I told you I wouldn't take too much time, but I do want to leave off just one point, right? And when we start talking about STR cribs and what it is that you provide, what's the vision for growth? What is the next steps? Where do you guys see yourselves here moving forward? And where are the hot spots you're going to focus on?
That's a good question, man. I would say that I still feel like we're really in our infancy. I feel like we're just getting going. We're just hitting the ground running. And so for us, it's more of the same and it's higher quality, not necessarily more quantity. And so I'm not trying to go out and build and set up 1,000 short-term rentals next year. I want to go and set up 100 and make them the best possible version of themselves and really optimize those properties. And I think that that's really always been our mindset. It continues to be our mindset. And a lot of our property management partners are starting to adapt that same mindset as well. It's like, hey, maybe I don't need 200 properties under management that are all making 50, 60 grand a year. Maybe I only need 50 or 60 properties that are all making 150 grand a year. And so we've always been in the quality over quantity mindset. And I think that's the way, at least that we've seen our investors do really well in the short term rental space. It's not necessarily, hey, how do I go get another couple properties? It's, hey, this property's underperforming. How do I get this one to make a little bit more money and do as well as it can before I go move on to the next one? So that's it, man. Just quality over quantity.
I love it. I love it. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody listening is at least taking away a couple of good gems of this because this really is helpful. And I think it's something that sits in property managers' mind of how can I increase my revenue even in tougher times? And it's really standing out, getting your property to stand out above and beyond the rest. And then it's the simple nuts and bolts. Like, hey, if you've got a great view, take a picture of it. Take a good picture of it, right? Like
Take a
if you got
professional pic.
yeah, right,
Take a
professional
professional
pictures of
picture.
it, right? If you have like this cool like pickleball court, maybe take it on a nice day. Put the
Yeah.
put the paths, right? Get it so that it sells. But again, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And for everybody listening, again, like, subscribe. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next week with another awesome guest. But again, thanks so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for having me on, Jamie. Always fun to chat with you guys, and hopefully we'll catch you at the next event.
You got it, brother. Appreciate you.
Welcome y'all to the VRNation station. We're diving deep into vacation rental sensations. From management tips to the latest creation, join us each week for some sparkle and conversation. VRNation station, tune in and feel the thrill.